With ocean predators having prey they naturally feed on, experts believe humans aren't their prey. However, these same humans go after ocean predators' prey, which is why animals like sharks also go after humans. And with their immense ferocity, they do wreak havoc, as happened on a beach where 7 people got maimed within 3 minutes. Join us as we narrate the harrowing incidents. The morning of October 3, 2024, began like any other in Monterey Bay, California. The sun bathed the coastline as tourists and locals gathered on the beach. Children played in the sand, surfers prepared their boards, and families set up for a day by the sea. The calm waters invited swimmers, unaware of the lurking danger beneath the surface. Just beyond the buoys, a large great white shark prowled the depths, its dark eyes scanning the waters. With dwindling prey due to overfishing and warming ocean temperatures, the shark had been pushed closer to shore in its desperate search for food. The usual abundance of fish and seals in Monterey Bay had disappeared, forcing the predator into unfamiliar territory. Its movements were calculated and tense, driven not just by hunger but also by the urgent need to survive in a changing environment. As the beachgoers remained blissfully unaware, the shark moved silently beneath them, a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the natural world, and how quickly that balance can shift. The beachgoers, entirely unaware of the danger lurking beneath them, continued their morning routine. Among them were the Donnellys, a family visiting from Texas. Amanda Donnelly sat in the sand, watching her 2 children, Lucas and Hannah, play at the water's edge. Nearby, surfers paddled out, waiting for the next swell, and a group of college students tossed a frisbee back and forth, laughing as it sailed through the air. At around 10:13 a.m., just as the sun began to climb higher into the sky, the ocean surface broke with a ferocity that no one could have anticipated. A large, dark fin sliced through the water near the shallows. It was the first sign, but it went unnoticed by most, mistaken for a dolphin or perhaps a shadow cast by the waves. But then came the breach. The great white erupted from the water, its sleek torpedo-like body vaulting into the air with terrifying speed. The force of its movement sent a spray of seawater flying in all directions. For a fleeting moment, it seemed almost graceful in its raw, predatory power before it crashed down, jaws wide, in the midst of the crowded swimming area. Chaos erupted as people screamed, scrambling for the shore. Parents frantically grabbed their children, dragging them out of the water, while others were paralyzed by shock, their minds struggling to process the horror unfolding before them. The first victim, a young woman named Emily Kane, had been closest to the shark's path. She disappeared beneath the churning water as the shark struck, her screams swallowed by the sea. The water around her turned a bright, terrible red, and the crowd on the beach erupted in a panicked frenzy. Before anyone could react, the shark struck again. Its speed was unmatched, driven by hunger and desperation. The crowd in the water had been thick, too many people to evade its powerful jaws. A man, Richard Olson, who had been standing waist-deep with his daughter, felt the water suddenly pull him forward as if by an unseen force. In seconds, the water around him was filled with thrashing limbs and screams as the shark tore through the surf, claiming life after life. Families on the shore stood helpless, watching in horror. Some ran towards the water, shouting the names of loved ones, while others froze, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The attack lasted just 3 minutes, but in those moments, the peaceful beach had transformed into a scene of sheer terror. Among the casualties were 7 lives, taken so swiftly that it left the survivors reeling. The Donnelly family had barely escaped. Amanda had dragged Lucas and Hannah from the water, her heart racing as the reality of what had happened sank in. She had seen others who weren't so lucky, parents who stood at the shoreline, screaming for children who would never return. By the time lifeguards and first responders reached the scene, the shark had disappeared back into the deep. Boats were dispatched to scour the area, but the great white had vanished as swiftly as it had come. The beach was evacuated, cordoned off, and soon filled with flashing lights and emergency personnel. The aftermath of the attack cast a heavy pall over Monterey Bay. The once vibrant beach was silent, filled only with the hushed murmurs of the grieving and the mechanical sounds of helicopters and rescue boats. Authorities quickly began their investigation, desperate to understand how such a tragedy could have occurred. Marine biologists from local institutions were called in, and what they found was both troubling and deeply unsettling. The shark's aggressive behavior was not typical. Great whites, while dangerous, rarely ventured into such shallow waters, and attacks on this scale were unprecedented. As the scientists studied the patterns, they began to uncover the disturbing truth. Rising ocean temperatures driven by climate change have started to disrupt the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Prey species, such as seals and fish, had migrated to calmer waters, leaving the great whites with fewer food sources. This particular shark had likely been drawn close to shore in a desperate search for sustenance. With its natural prey depleted, the creature had attacked indiscriminately, its instincts overriding any usual caution. The environmental disruptions were not just causing the ocean's creatures to suffer. They were pushing predators like the great white into conflict with humans. The deaths weighed heavily on the community. Vigils were held for the victims: Emily Kane, Richard Olson, and the others whose lives had been cut short in a matter of minutes. The Donnellys returned to Texas, haunted by the memories of the attack, while families up and down the coast mourned their losses. Efforts to prevent future tragedies intensified. Marine biologists and conservationists urged authorities to address the underlying ecological issues. The warnings were stark. Without intervention, incidents like the one in Monterey Bay would only become more common as the ocean continued to warm and prey populations declined. It was not just a shark problem. It was a crisis born of human impact on the environment, one that demanded urgent action before more lives were lost. But for those who had been on the beach that morning, the damage was already done. The once beautiful shore of Monterey Bay would forever be stained by the memory of those terrible 3 minutes when the sea turned red and the world beneath the waves revealed its darker side. The sun sparkled on the Pacific, casting shimmering reflections over the waters surrounding a remote Hawaiian island. The air was warm, filled with the scent of salt and coconut, while waves crashed in rhythmic symphony along the shore. 5 friends stood on the beach, gazing out at the wild surf beyond the reef, drawn together by their love for adventure and the ocean. Liam, the group's leader, had suggested the trip after hearing rumors of untouched waves breaking far from the tourist path. It was an irresistible call for the group, which included Ethan, his childhood friend, Mara, a fearless surfer, Talia, quiet but determined, and Eric, the adrenaline junkie always seeking the next thrill. They had arrived days earlier, captivated by the island's raw beauty, its jungles, volcanic peaks, and pristine beaches. They spent their time diving into lagoons, exploring reefs, and soaking in the island's solitude, far removed from civilization. But today, it was all about the waves. As they waxed their boards and shared excited glances, they felt the pull of the ocean. The waves were larger and more powerful than anything they had surfed before. But the challenge only fueled their excitement. Unbeknownst to them, a lone tiger shark prowled the waters beneath. Normally a deep-sea predator, the shark had ventured closer to shore, driven by hunger. Overfishing had depleted its natural food sources, forcing it into unfamiliar territory, where it now searched for prey unseen beneath the surface. The friends surfed for hours, oblivious to the predator lurking beneath them. They were exhilarated by the challenge, catching wave after wave, tumbling into the water, and laughing as the sheer force of nature threw them off their boards. Each time they paddled back out, the shark watched, its predatory instincts sharpening. To it, the surfers were erratic shapes on the surface, splashing and flailing, an unusual but intriguing possibility for a meal. It was Mara who first noticed something was wrong. She had been paddling out alone, farther than the others, her arms aching with the effort of cutting through the heavy surf. The water around her felt strange. There was a stillness beneath the surface that she couldn't quite place. The sun, once bright and comforting, now seemed harsh, its reflection glaring off the water like a warning. She paused, letting herself float for a moment, her eyes scanning the horizon. Something deep within her, a primal instinct perhaps, told her to head back to the others. She turned, beginning to paddle, but the current was against her. Each stroke seemed harder than the last, her muscles burning. The waves grew more erratic, the swells larger. As she glanced down, she caught a glimpse of something, a shadow moving swiftly beneath her. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but her heart raced. She pushed herself harder, the fear growing, a sickening knot forming in her stomach. The shark was closer now, circling. It had chosen its target, drawn to Mara's movements and her separation from the group, which marked her as vulnerable. It surged forward with terrifying speed, its massive tail propelling it through the water, jaws ready to strike. Liam was the first to see the fin. He had been waiting for the next wave, watching Mara from a distance when the dark shape sliced through the water behind her. His heart froze. The sleek, menacing fin was unmistakable. A tiger shark, and a large one. Panic gripped him as he realized how close it was and how fast it was moving. He screamed her name, though the roar of the waves drowned him out. Mara felt the water shift beneath her, a sudden surge that sent her off balance. She turned just in time to see the dorsal fin rise behind her, a glimpse of gray, and then the massive shadow of the shark. Her body reacted before her mind could fully process what was happening. She kicked, desperate to get to her board to escape, but the shark was too close. It struck, its mighty jaws clamping down on the edge of her board, pulling her under. The others saw it happen in an instant, the thrashing water, the flash of Mara's board flipping into the air, and then nothing but blood churning in the waves. Talia screamed, her voice breaking with terror, while Ethan and Eric paddled furiously toward the spot where Mara had disappeared. In seconds, the ocean had transformed from a playground to a nightmare, and the friends were caught in the middle of it. Mara fought with everything she had. The shark's grip was on her board, not her, but she could feel its power, the crushing force of its bite. She kicked at it, struggling to free herself as it pulled her deeper. Her lungs burned as she fought for air, her arms flailing in the water. In the chaos, she managed to break free, kicking toward the surface with all her strength. Her head broke through the waves, gasping for breath, but the shark was still there, circling, waiting for its next attack. Liam reached her first, grabbing her arm and pulling her onto his board. His heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the water, trying to keep Mara calm and himself calm. He could see the others paddling toward them, but the shark was still out there, somewhere beneath them. He knew they didn't have long. In the distance, a small fishing boat appeared, cutting through the waves. It was Keone, a local fisherman they had befriended earlier in the trip. He had been watching the surf from a distance, noticing the strange behavior of the waves and the sudden panic. Without hesitation, he steered his boat toward them, knowing the danger they were in. As he approached, he saw the blood in the water and the fear on their faces. He had seen sharks before, too many of them lately, desperate and hungry in waters that once teemed with life. Keone pulled alongside the group, shouting for them to climb aboard. One by one, they scrambled into the boat, their bodies shaking with exhaustion and fear. He hauled Mara in last, her leg bleeding from a scrape against the reef, but miraculously, she was alive. The shark lingered for a moment longer, circling the boat as if contemplating its next move, before disappearing back into the depths. As they sped away from the surf, the island fading behind them, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. They had come for the thrill of the ocean, but they had forgotten the ancient power that still ruled these waters, the delicate balance that had been upset by human hands. As Keone guided the boat back to shore, he knew that the shark, and the island, the ocean, and everything in it, needed saving. The Galapagos Islands, an oasis of life in the heart of the Pacific, are renowned for their vast biodiversity. Encircled by swirling currents, the area serves as a breeding ground for countless species, including the elusive and majestic hammerhead sharks. In recent years, these sharks have become an enigma to marine scientists, with their migration patterns altering in ways that defied prior understanding. In response, an international team of marine biologists embarked on a deep-sea research dive, determined to unravel the mysteries surrounding these formidable predators. Among the crew were Dr. Marcus Lane, a seasoned marine biologist from the UK, known for his extensive work with sharks, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a young but brilliant scientist from Spain, whose recent research had shed new light on the relationship between climate change and marine species. They were joined by two other scientists, Dr. Sophie Clark, a technology expert who specialized in deep-sea exploration, and James Montoya, a photographer and documentarian. Together they formed an eclectic yet focused team, driven by their shared love of the ocean and the pursuit of knowledge. Their vessel had anchored several miles off the coast of Wolf Island, one of the least accessible parts of the Galapagos archipelago. Beneath the boat, the depths of the Pacific stretched down like a dark abyss, its mysteries hidden under layers of water that grew colder and darker as one descended. The team had planned for days of meticulous work, using submersibles and remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, to track and record hammerhead movements. The expedition had started well. Schools of hammerheads, sleek, ghost-like figures, glided through the water, their silhouettes framed against the shimmering sunlight filtering down from the surface. The team had been studying them from a distance, observing their migration, and noting unusual behavior that might point to stress caused by rising sea temperatures or the dwindling availability of prey. But as the third day of the dive approached, tension filled the air. The team had detected something odd. A large hammerhead, far bigger than any they'd seen on previous dives, appeared to be trailing their submersible. It moved in slow, methodical circles around them, its dark eyes ever watchful, reflecting both intelligence and territorial aggression. Its behavior set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind. From the safety of their submersible, Marcus noted the shark's irregular, erratic patterns. Unlike the others, which cruised by in loose formations, this one kept returning, spiraling ever closer. Its wide and flat head oscillated from side to side in agitation, a silent warning. On the fourth dive, the aggression escalated. They descended into the deep, the world around them rapidly shifting into twilight as the sun above became a distant memory. The ROVs, equipped with lights and high-definition cameras, illuminated the ocean's depths. Schools of small fish darted away while the hulking figures of hammerheads loomed closer in the distance. Elena's voice came through on the comm system, narrating the activity she was observing, but Marcus wasn't paying attention anymore. His gaze was fixed on the giant. There it was again, lurking, a creature of immense power, muscles rippling under its smooth gray skin. It didn't just swim, it stalked like a lion assessing prey. The shark came nearer, cutting through the water like a missile. As it closed the distance, it did something unexpected. It rammed the side of the submersible. The impact sent a shudder through the structure, knocking the crew off balance. Startled, they quickly assessed the situation. One of the external lights had gone out and a small crack had appeared in one of the equipment's protective casings. Sophie, the technology expert, frowned as she monitored the submersible systems. The shark circled again. This time, its approach was more deliberate. Its behavior defied the typical cautious nature of hammerheads. Instead of shying away from the vessel's noise or its lights, it seemed drawn to them, its agitation mounting with every second. Another hit, this time harder. The submersible shook violently, the lights flickered, and alarms went off inside the cabin. Marcus cursed under his breath. Elena scrambled to document the shark's behavior, but it was clear that their research was no longer a simple dive. It had become a struggle for survival. Their equipment was being damaged, their resources were depleting, and they were far too deep to surface quickly. A quick check of the submersible systems revealed more damage than anticipated. A propeller had been knocked loose, one of the oxygen regulators was malfunctioning, and their communication system was growing intermittently. They were stranded, hundreds of feet below the surface, with a massive, agitated hammerhead shark actively trying to hinder them. The team's collective heartbeats pounded in unison as they hurriedly strategized. With the submersible barely functioning and no immediate help available, they knew they couldn't outswim the shark. It was too fast and too strong, and the vastness of the ocean meant that they were alone in this hostile environment. The shark's relentless attack continued, battering the submersible as its structure groaned under the strain. Inside, James Montoya, the documentarian, steadied himself, capturing the terrifying ordeal on film. His camera recorded both the shark's fury and the team's helplessness as they floated, isolated and vulnerable, in the dark depths of the ocean. Dr. Sophie Clark quickly recalibrated their remaining ROV, deploying it as a decoy in hopes of distracting the shark long enough for the team to figure out a solution. At first, the shark ignored the small vehicle, continuing its assault on the submersible. But after several tense moments, it finally turned, and pursued the decoy into the abyss. This brief respite allowed the team to assess their grim situation. With the submersible compromised, a rapid ascent wasn't possible. They had to buy themselves time, hoping the shark's aggression would wane. Elena, reviewing the footage, recognized that the shark's behavior wasn't just random aggression. It was territorialism. Climate change and overfishing have disrupted the ocean's balance, forcing creatures like this hammerhead to behave unpredictably. The team had likely ventured too close to its hunting ground, triggering the attack. As they restored the vessel's partial functionality, Sophie activated the emergency distress beacon. Though help was on its way, they knew it would take time. The sun hung high over the vast, sunlit beaches of Florida, casting shimmering reflections on the ocean's surface as it welcomed a bustling crowd. The annual surfing competition had drawn participants and spectators from across the country, their excitement palpable in the humid air. Palm trees swayed lazily in the gentle breeze while bright banners fluttered along the beachfront, adding a festive touch to the atmosphere. Surfers, bronzed from hours under the sun, prepared their boards, chatting among themselves, their bodies humming with the anticipation of riding the powerful waves the Atlantic promised today. The sea was alive with motion, waves crashing rhythmically against the shore, a continuous roar that blended into the chatter of the crowds. Jackson Pierce, a seasoned competitor, watched the surf intently. He'd competed in countless events over the years, but something about this one felt different. The waves had been incredibly volatile and unpredictable, almost as if they were disturbed by some unseen force. Still, the ocean's pull was irresistible. This was why they were all here, to test themselves against the raw power of nature. As the competition commenced, boards cut through the water, leaving trails of white foam in their wake. Spectators lined the shore, cheering on their favorite surfers as they maneuvered with skill and precision. Jackson paddled out, joining the fray, his mind solely focused on the task at hand, finding the perfect wave and carving his path through it. Around him, the sea teemed with life, the water beneath shimmering blue, full of unknown depths. But as the day wore on, the mood began to shift. Lifeguards stationed in watchtowers squinted out to sea, scanning the horizon with increasing frequency. What had initially seemed like just another perfect day for surfing soon revealed itself to be something far more ominous. Those watching from the shore had spotted a few scattered fins. The unmistakable dark, triangular shapes cutting through the surface sent a ripple of concern through the crowd. Blacktip sharks. Blacktips were common in these waters, usually harmless, keeping their distance from humans. But there was something different about their behavior today. Ordinarily cautious, they were now circling closer to the surfers, their movements erratic, almost aggressive. Jackson felt the unease before he even saw them. A shiver ran down his spine as he noticed shadows moving beneath him, dark shapes flickering just beyond the edge of his vision. The competition continued, but there was an undercurrent of fear now, a collective tension gripping the beach. The first sign of panic came when a surfer named Dylan abruptly wiped out, his board flipping in the air before he disappeared beneath the surface. Gasps rose from the crowd. Moments later, he resurfaced, flailing in the water, his face contorted in terror. The blacktips were closing in. The lifeguards sprang into action. Sharp and piercing whistles blared as they frantically waved at the surfers still in the water. They shouted, their voices drowned by the crash of the waves. Jet skis roared to life, racing toward the danger zone. From the shore, it looked like chaos. Surfers struggling to paddle back to safety, boards colliding, people calling out to one another, trying to avoid the gathering swarm of sharks. Jackson remained focused, his instincts telling him to stay calm, even as adrenaline surged through him. He caught a glimpse of a fellow surfer, Emily, her face pale as she paddled desperately toward the shore. She wasn't fast enough. A blacktip darted past her, its sleek body slicing through the water. The fins multiplied, the ocean now alive with them, the predators drawn in by some unseen force. What had caused this sudden surge of aggression? The waters off the Florida coast had been changing for years. Pollution, shifts in temperature, and overfishing had all altered the ecosystem. But no one had expected an event like this, certainly not during a high-profile competition. The blacktips, once content with smaller prey, seemed emboldened, their usual timidity replaced with a predatory instinct that bordered on frenzy. As Jackson paddled toward Emily, the water seemed to thicken with tension. The sharks darted beneath the surface, swift and unpredictable, their sleek forms barely visible. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his strokes steady, pushing forward, determined to reach her. Behind them, another surfer, Tom, screamed as one of the sharks brushed against his leg, knocking him off balance. He thrashed in the water, his board spinning wildly beside him. The lifeguards were closing in, but the sharks were faster. Jackson could hear the roar of the jet skis, but it felt distant, like the ocean itself was swallowing the sound. Emily was panicking now, her strokes uneven, her breaths coming in short gasps. Jackson reached her just as a shark lunged, its sleek body shooting out of the water before disappearing again. He grabbed her arm, urging her to stay calm. She nodded, eyes wide, as they both paddled furiously toward the shore. Behind them, the scene grew more desperate. Several surfers were now in the water, battling not only the waves but also the predators that circled them. The jet skis swooped in and lifeguards reached down to pull the fallen surfers to safety. The sea churned, a mix of foam, surfboards, and the dark shapes of the sharks weaving through the chaos. On the shore, the crowd had gone silent, their earlier excitement replaced by a collective horror as they watched the scene unfold. The beach, once so lively, now felt like a fragile sanctuary, the boundary between land and sea more difficult than ever. Jackson and Emily reached the shallows, the water receding around them as they stumbled onto the sand, breathless and shaking. They looked back at the ocean, where the remaining surfers were still locked in a desperate struggle. The lifeguards were doing everything they could, but the sharks were relentless, their numbers growing, driven by some instinctual hunger that no one could fully understand. In the aftermath, as the last of the surfers were brought to safety, the questions began. What had triggered the blacktip's sudden aggression? Scientists and environmentalists speculated that pollution had driven away their usual prey, forcing them closer to shore. Rising water temperatures, another consequence of climate change, had altered their migration patterns, pushing them into unfamiliar territory. Human activity, it seemed, had upset the delicate balance of the ecosystem, and the sharks were responding in the only way they knew how. The competition, once a celebration of human skill and bravery, had turned into a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability. The Amazon River Basin, vast and teeming with life, has always been a source of sustenance and culture for the people who lived along its banks. Thick canopies of trees stretched over the river, the sounds of cicadas, frogs, and distant birds mingling in the humid air. The river, which snaked through the heart of the basin, was both a lifeline and a constant mystery, its murky depths home to creatures that had constantly stirred the imaginations of the locals. For generations, the communities had lived in relative harmony with their environment, drawing what they needed from the river while respecting its untamed wilderness. But in recent years, that harmony had been increasingly strained. Logging companies, driven by global demand for timber and agricultural expansion, had begun carving out large portions of the forest, stripping the land bare. The once dense rainforest, home to thousands of species, was now dotted with scars. Patches of earth exposed to the unrelenting sun, streams clogged with debris, and wildlife forced to flee. The balance had shifted, and nature, displaced and confused, was beginning to retaliate in subtle, dangerous ways. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when the bull sharks, creatures of both salt and freshwater, started to venture much farther upstream than ever before. These apex predators, once confined to the brackish estuaries and coastal waters, were now being sighted near human settlements deep inland. Fishermen had always known about the occasional shark, but no one had ever heard of them this far from the ocean. This was unprecedented. Among those living by the river was Miguel, a seasoned fisherman in his late 50s who had spent his entire life on the water. The river was as much a part of him as his flesh, and he knew its every turn, its every hidden cove. He had seen the changes firsthand, the once abundant schools of fish becoming more erratic, the water running warmer and murkier, and the forest growing eerily silent in certain parts. He had heard rumors of the sharks, but like many, he had dismissed them as just that, rumors. One early morning, Miguel set out alone, just as he always had. His canoe cut smoothly through the glassy surface of the river, the mist rising in tendrils as the sun crept over the horizon. The air was thick and heavy, the distant drone of chainsaws barely audible in the background. He cast his net, waiting patiently as the currents tugged gently at the boat. But as the minutes passed, he noticed something strange. The usual vibrant life of the river seemed muted, as if the creatures below were hiding from some unseen threat. Suddenly, a violent jolt rocked the canoe, nearly knocking Miguel into the water. He looked down, his heart pounding, but saw nothing in the swirling depths. He thought perhaps it was a large fish or even a log. But then it happened again, this time with greater force. A massive dark shape rushed beneath the canoe, and before Miguel could react, the water exploded around him. The attack was swift and brutal. Miguel felt a sharp, searing pain in his leg as the shark's jaws clamped down, dragging him into the water. He thrashed wildly, his mind a blur of terror and confusion. The shark, relentless and powerful, pulled him deeper, the river filling his lungs as he struggled to break free. But there was no escaping the predator. Moments later, the river grew still, and Miguel was gone, claimed by the very waters he had spent his life navigating. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the small village. When his mangled body was discovered days later, washed up on the shore miles downstream, the cause of death was apparent. Panic spread like wildfire. The river, once a source of life and livelihood, had become a place of danger and fear. The villagers, already on edge from the environmental changes surrounding them, were now faced with a new, more immediate threat. The local authorities, unsure how to respond, called in scientists to investigate. Among them was Dr. Helena Ramos, an environmental biologist who had spent years studying the delicate ecosystems of the Amazon. She had long warned of the consequences of deforestation and habitat destruction. Still, even she hadn't anticipated this. Bull sharks, forced upriver by the degradation of their natural habitats, were now preying on humans as their food sources dwindled. As Helena and her team began their research, the community grew restless. There were whispers of revenge, of hunting the sharks down and killing them before they could strike again. But Helena urged caution. The sharks were not the true enemy. They were victims of the same forces that were wreaking havoc on the entire ecosystem. The villagers, many of whom had always viewed the river as a benevolent force, now had to confront the reality that their actions, and the actions of those beyond their community, had driven this once rare predator into their midst. Helena's team began tracking the bull sharks, using drones and underwater sensors to monitor their movements. What they discovered was alarming. An entire population of sharks had migrated far upstream, drawn by disrupted currents and dwindling food sources. Deforestation, rising water temperatures, and pollution forced them into dangerous proximity to human settlements. The village elders, deeply connected to the river, gathered to discuss the crisis. Some suggested drastic measures like fencing off the river or using dynamite to drive the sharks away. But Helena urged caution, reminding them that further damage could make the situation worse. The real issue was the destruction of the forest, and the solution lay in restoring it. In the following weeks, the community united. Under Helena's guidance, they worked to restore the damaged forest, planting trees and clearing debris from the river to help re-establish balance. They also adapted to live alongside the sharks, setting up warning systems and avoiding certain areas of the river. The shark attacks forced the community to confront the environmental crisis they faced. The displaced sharks symbolized the broader changes threatening the Amazon. Slowly, the village learned to coexist with the sharks, acknowledging them as part of their evolving world. The Florida Everglades were renowned for their wild, untamed beauty, a sprawling wilderness of mangroves, marshes, and rivers that hosted some of North America's most unique wildlife. On this particular late spring morning, the sun rose over the horizon, casting an amber glow across the dense tangle of mangroves. The air was thick with humidity, typical for this time of year, but a refreshing breeze rustled the leaves, offering a brief respite from the rising heat. A group of eco-conscious travelers gathered near the water's edge, eager to embark on their guided eco-tour of the Everglades. Among them were Emily and Mark, a couple from New York seeking an escape from city life. Clara, a passionate marine biology professor, and Paul, a retired man dedicated to environmental causes. Each participant was eager to learn about the delicate mangrove ecosystems and the diverse creatures inhabiting the region, including the docile nurse sharks that occasionally glided through the shallows. Leading the tour were seasoned guides Alex and Jenna, both with years of experience in the Everglades, alongside Dr. Harper, a marine biologist specializing in sharks and rays. As they gathered on the dock, Alex outlined the day's itinerary and safety protocols while Jenna prepared the eco-friendly boats. Dr. Harper reassured the group that nurse sharks, though significant, were typically gentle and harmless. As the boats set off, gliding silently through the still waters, the group marveled at their surroundings. Dense mangroves formed vibrant green walls, their roots anchoring a rich ecosystem beneath. Birds swooped overhead and the occasional ripple hinted at fish below. Everything felt perfect, serene, and profoundly connected to nature. Yet beneath the surface, unforeseen changes were unfolding, setting the stage for an unexpected encounter. After about an hour of weaving through the mangroves, the group arrived at the bay, a serene, shallow stretch of water surrounded by dense green foliage. Jenna anchored the boats and Alex prepared the snorkeling gear. One by one, the participants slipped into the water, their movements slow and careful, eager to see the world below. The water was clear enough to make out the sandy bottom and the occasional dark shape of a fish or stingray. For the first few minutes, everything went according to plan. The group floated peacefully, watching as the gentle currents moved through the bay. Then Clara, who had drifted a bit farther from the group, noticed a shadow passing beneath her. She strained to see more clearly, realizing it was a nurse shark, a large one, perhaps 7 or 8 feet long. Its smooth brown body glided effortlessly through the water, ignoring her presence as it had likely done with countless other humans before. But something was off. The shark wasn't just passing through, it circled. And then another shadow appeared. Another nurse shark, this one slightly smaller, joined the first. They moved in a way Clara hadn't seen before, quickly, erratically. She watched with growing unease as they darted back and forth, closer to her now. Without warning, the first shark turned sharply and bolted toward her. In her panic, Clara thrashed, kicking toward the surface, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't understand. Nurse sharks didn't behave this way. Alex, who had been keeping a close eye on the group from the boat, saw the sudden burst of movement in the water and called out to the others. Panic rippled through the group as more sharks appeared, their movements aggressive and unpredictable. The calm, docile creatures that the group had expected to encounter were behaving in ways that defied everything they had been told. Several participants, including Mark, had to fend off the sharks with frantic kicks as they swam back to the boats. Alex and Jenna moved quickly, hauling people out of the water as fast as they could. But the sharks were relentless. They rammed the boats, their powerful bodies slamming into the hulls with a force that rocked the vessels dangerously. Jenna lost her balance as one of the sharks surged upward, smashing its head into the side of the boat. The others tried to grab her before she tumbled into the water, but it was too late. She hit the water with a splash, immediately trying to scramble back to the surface as sharks circled her. From the second boat, Dr. Harper watched in disbelief. This behavior was unheard of. Nurse sharks were bottom dwellers and scavengers, and their mouths were not even suited for biting into large prey. Yet here they were, attacking anything that moved. The group, now back on the boats, could only watch in horror as Jenna fought her way back toward them. Alex threw her a line, pulling her aboard just as one of the sharks breached, snapping at the air where her legs had been only moments before. The boats were taking on water, each strike from the sharks causing more damage. They had no choice but to abandon the snorkeling area and head back, hoping the electric motors could outrun the onslaught. As the boats limped back through the mangroves, the group sat in shock, their faces pale with fear and disbelief. Dr. Harper, once she had caught her breath, began to piece together what had happened. Pollution, habitat loss, overfishing. The Everglades had been under immense pressure for years, and the delicate balance of its ecosystems was deteriorating. The sharks' food sources had likely been disrupted by human activity, forcing them to act in unnatural ways, driven by hunger and territorial instincts heightened by environmental stress. Back at the dock, the group disembarked in silence. What had begun as a peaceful tour meant to foster an appreciation for the natural world had turned into a lesson in the dire consequences of human impact. The once docile nurse sharks had become a warning. Nature could only be pushed so far before it went back. As Alex and Jenna worked with Dr. Harper to report the incident, they realized that the reality in Everglades was changing and not for the better. If immediate action weren't taken to address the environmental damage, encounters like today's would become more frequent and more dangerous. The need for sustainable practices wasn't just about preserving beauty. It was about survival for humans and wildlife alike.